find really fascinating is the fact that you're talking about the Roman Empire at its height, right? And I don't know what this has to do with it, but in pop culture right now, they're talking about men always thinking about the Roman Empire. Have you seen this?
I
I
know.
all
I
these
know.
guys are talking about men think about the Roman Empire every so often. And I even started following a group, and I actually feel as a Christian, I'm like, am I committing sin here by following this Roman Empire thing and thinking about the Roman Empire? And I think it's cool, even though you know what I mean? It's just some
Yeah.
of this stuff that comes to mind. But I'm looking at this going, all right, what can we learn from these guys? Because you're right, they're in a cultural moment where, and you see this in the book, it's as if all the advances they went had to go back to the beginning, or no, where we're at now, we're going back to the beginning, very similar to the second century, right? What did you mean by that when you say back to the beginning? Because some people are like, I'm not following you right now.
Well, what you just said about the Roman Empire, I remember when I was writing this book in the middle of it, one of my kids was reading Percy Jackson, was reading one of the Percy Jackson novels. If you know the thesis of Percy Jackson, basically the gods, the pagan gods take over New York City. And so you're literally, it's like Percy Jackson is like a living illustration of what I'm trying to write, what I'm trying to capture. And that is, yeah, the opening scene. I go back to one of the most famous baptistries in Rome, the Lateran Baptistry. And it's actually a trip I took to Rome many years ago. And I stood, this was a place where membership, where Christians were baptized, and where I talk about transfer from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light. And I just talk about how the baptistry was empty. So I draw this sort of ironic kind of thing in that we are back where we started. Here I am at one of the earliest Christian fonts that was built to signify that many are coming into the church. But now we're back where we started. No one's joining the church. I cite works like Bullivant's Non-Verts and the Great Dechurching and these other things that show we are no longer living in a Christendom, which I define as the institutions are defined by Christian mores. There is now a range, to use Charles Taylor, there's now a range of moral options, of which Christianity is just one. And that is reminiscent of that second and third century world.
What I thought was really interesting is you're going through the book, and we have this advantage of looking at it in retrospect, where we know the history and how it developed, but at the time they're trying to figure out their own footing because they're considered really non-entities. They're fringe people. Like, why don't you just get in line with everybody else? Why do you guys have to insist on being different and being distinct? Just stop. And there was all this confusion about them, as you talk about, where they're confused at incest, calling each other brother and sister, or love feast, cannibals because they're drinking on the body and blood of Jesus. And you read this and you're like, I just imagine coming out of church and trying to explain this to your friends where they're like, okay, just tell us, what is this church thing that you're
Yep.
doing right now? We don't understand. We're concerned for you. Like it's like a Roman intervention in the ancient world. Like, and you're bringing shame to us. Like, me and your mother are really frustrated. I would have been happy if you gone out and gone to tattoos or whatever you wanted to do. But who is this Christus guy that you're following? and
Yep.
and they are struggling to find the language to explain to people what they're doing in the world. And you're right, we're back where we started today.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting if you read, for example, I mean, every chapter begins with kind of a story. So I try to use some kind of illustration or story, but one of them, like I mentioned just a second ago, Polycarp's martyrdom, one of the earliest martyrdom accounts we have outside the New Testament, of course, Stephen in the book of Acts. But it's fascinating. In it, you have a Christian who, first of all, the Roman soldiers show up to arrest him. He invites them in. He sets a meal before his enemies, and he asks them, "Before you arrest me, let me go pray." So he goes in the room and prays, and he prays for so loud and so long that on the way back, the soldiers are convicted because this guy is so pious, and like you say, he shamed them. Then he gets into the amphitheater and the crowd's calling for his death. He's got a Roman official, a proconsul sitting in front of him, and they're like, he's like, just pinch a little incense. And, right there, he quotes Romans 13. He quotes a version of Romans 13. You don't understand, a proconsul. You don't understand, political figure, that my God is king over all. How can I deny my king? You're asking me to deny my king. You're asking me to deny what the apostle proclaimed to me. And you're reading this, and yeah, it's like reading it now in sort of this post-Christian world, things that were refracted for me, things I hadn't quite understood or saw in some of those texts, I see now in some of what's happening within the West in particular, and what's happening with Christians. And yeah, they were not perfect. And I do talk about some of the differences between today and back then, and they were not perfect, but I do love watching sort of organically just how they're trying to engage the world while they are embedded. And it was a fascinating kind of intellectual study, or a study to kind of think about some of these things.